Director of Remote Work. Is it 2021's hottest job title, or is it just a fad? Let's find out over a cup of coffee. Yes, this is Virtual Coffee Chat with Lewis for Think Remote. Let's talk a bit about the new hot job, Director of Remote Work. So, Director of Remote Work has been in the spotlight for the last couple of weeks. Many articles have been written about it. And basically, they come from advocates of having a person or team dedicated to remote work. They say it can help businesses transition more cleanly to a fully remote or hybrid workforce. And well, sounds okay to me, but it also sounds like a consultant job and not really something that you need to create a new place in your company for. But some people think otherwise, right? So let's take my previous podcast guest, Darren Merv, as an example. He is the head of remote at GitLab since 2019, and he makes a good case for it, right? So let's have some coffee and look at it, look at the pros and cons and where such a job title makes sense and where it doesn't, right? And don't worry, Darren, I'm not going to put you out of a job, right? Let's think about businesses that are born remote, right? As they are born, they start codifying their processes in a remote first way. And every team is born like that, is born with those processes and, and learns how to work with them. So sure, there will be stops and starts, right? Because it's still a very different way of doing work than the previous way. Probably people need to educate themselves, and a consultant here and there, talking with a consultant here and there to help the company grow from scratch remotely is probably a good idea. But do these companies need a head of remote or a director of remote? While they are at a certain size, probably not. I mean, I can understand it for GitLab, right? A company of such a size needs, constant evaluation of processes, constant updating, constant optimizing. But a smaller business, right, and especially if they are starting as remote, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. On the other hand, right, for businesses that are small, let's say under 50 people, right, their departments and teams are more or less agile and independent. Could they benefit from a person that comes in temporarily and helps them set up their workflows and remote strategy? Yeah, probably yes. That's probably a yes. But then after such a person does that, there's really no need. There seems to be really no need for a director of remote work, right? The people who manage those teams can just really, well, integrate it into their usual processes. Now, that's not to say that there's no place for the role. Like I said, in bigger companies, certainly. And but on smaller companies, it seems to me that it's perfectly integratable onto the normal managerial, part after it's set up, right? If the company isn't born with it, it makes sense to have someone come in and teach you how to do it. So let's see what should these people, right, mostly handle either on bigger companies in a permanent basis or as consultants on smaller companies. Number one, there are four things. Number one, I believe it would be communication flow. Converting synchronous communication to asynchronous communication processes, probably the number one thing. Remote work lives or dies from communication. So it makes sense to have someone who is experienced come in, look at the way your business communicates, figure out what will work remotely, what won't, and how to change it, right? Documentation is a second major thing. Number two, documentation. Someone that's a director of remote should for sure make sure that the company has a solid strategy and processes for documentation. Will there be a team entirely devoted to documentation, to working with other teams to record their processes and the way they do things, or should that be managed and trained on a team by team basis? Well, that's something that the director of remote or that the head of remote can feasibly decide and set up. Now, the third thing that such a person should do is make sure company values are remote friendly or remote first, right? This means they don't mandate presence or counter remote processes, like, for example, a culture of having meetings for other decision, right? That's not, that will very easily create burnout, a situation of burnout among your remote workforce, and is also not friendly to distributed, time zones. Right. And of course, finally, number 4, and this is specifically for companies that aren't built as remote companies, real estate management and optimization. Right. If you want to have a hybrid company, or a company where people are free to choose between remote work or in-office work, then you need to figure out how that works the best, and how to optimize. Obviously, the argument for having someone in a dedicated role for this is that all of these take time, right? And again, unless your business is designed from scratch as remote, you'll have very little chance to handle it yourself. And so goes for your partners and managers. There's just a lot of overhead. This would be like adding like 33% to your workload, which is not feasible for most people. So it definitely makes sense to hire someone either as a consultant on a full-time basis, or on a full-time basis, depending on the size of the company. The hope on the smaller companies is that once the person sets up the rule set, right, how to properly communicate, how to document, matching the company values, managing real estate, and then, obviously a ton of other smaller things like vetting tools for all these processes, etc., then the hope is that in a smaller, more agile company, the managers can fold it into their management style with very little, if no overhead. Once this requires, once you have a company that requires that these things are reviewed and thought about constantly, then yes, it makes sense to have a director of remote work or a head of remote work. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the Monday Coffee as much as I have. Remember, if you did enjoy it, please subscribe. Just go to YouTube, press on the subscribe button, and also subscribe to Think Remote. If you subscribe to Think Remote, there will be nice stuff heading your way. This was Louis with the virtual coffee chat for Think Remote. See you tomorrow.